The first thing Micah Dempsey noticed when he stepped off the Greyhound bus was the smell of summer rain clinging to the air like a warning. The clouds hung low over the Montana plains, bruised with purple and silver, heavy enough to make you feel like the sky might collapse at any moment. He stood there for a long second, the duffel bag biting into his shoulder, staring down the quiet stretch of Main Street, as if it might give him an answer for why he'd come back. He hadn't planned to return to Ashford Creek, not after the way he'd left, fast, sharp, like slamming a door you didn't want to open again. But life has a way of cornering you until the only road left is the one you swore you'd never walk again. The diner was still there. Harper's old pickup was still parked crooked outside the hardware store. And just beyond the bend, past the line of cottonwoods, stood the Whitaker farmhouse, its white paint now dulled to a soft, aching gray. That was where she'd be. Savannah Hale. He told himself he wasn't going there. Not yet. Maybe not at all. But his feet didn't quite believe him. The gravel crunched under his boots as he followed the road out toward the fields. The summer grass swayed in slow, tired arcs, whispering against the breeze. Ashford Creek had a way of swallowing sound. Even the wind felt muted here, as if the land itself wanted to keep its secrets. Micah remembered the last time he'd been on this road. He'd been 17, sunburned and reckless, chasing the sound of her laughter through a mess of pine trees during that ill-fated school camping trip. They'd gotten lost that night, lost in more ways than one, and found their way to a clearing where the moon hung low and impossibly close. That night had lived in him for years, buried under everything he'd done to forget it, but walking this road again made it rise to the surface. Sharp and uninvited, he could almost hear her voice, low and uncertain, saying his name in the dark. And maybe he could almost admit, just to himself, that she was the real reason he'd come back. By the time he reached the edge of the Whitaker property, the air had thickened with the promise of rain. The front porch light was on, though the sun hadn't yet disappeared. It gave the house a kind of quiet watchfulness, as though it knew exactly who was standing at the fence. Savannah stepped out onto the porch, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look both older and exactly the same. She didn't see him at first. She was looking past the fields, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, like she was holding herself against the wind. When her gaze finally landed on him, there was no sharp intake of breath, no sudden smile, just a stillness, as if she'd known somehow that this moment was coming. "Micah," she said, her voice carrying just enough over the distance to reach him. Not a question, not a welcome, just his name, heavy with every year that had passed since that night in the woods. The next morning broke under a pale silver light, the kind that made the hills look like they'd been painted in watercolors. I stood in the kitchen of my mother's old house, the kettle humming on the stove, watching the steam curl up into the quiet air. The place still smelled faintly of her, lavender and the faintest trace of coffee grounds, though she'd been gone for years now. I'd planned to spend the day fixing up the porch railing, maybe oiling the squeaky screen door, but as I sipped my tea, my thoughts kept drifting back to Claire. Her voice low and uncertain, the way her eyes had searched mine last night, like she was still trying to decide whether she could trust me. By mid-morning, the sound of tires crunching gravel came from the road. I stepped outside and saw her old blue pickup pulling into the driveway. The sight made my pulse quicken in a way I wasn't ready to admit to myself. She got out, her hair swept back in a loose braid, a white button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves. In her hands she held a basket. "I figured you might not have had breakfast," she said, her smile cautious as if she'd rehearsed it. "Thought I'd bring something by." She followed me into the kitchen, placing the basket on the counter. Inside were still warm biscuits, a jar of honey, and a small crock of butter. The smell alone nearly undid me. We ate at the small kitchen table, the morning light stretching across the worn wood. For a while, we talked about safe things, weather, the condition of the roads, who'd moved out of town. But somewhere between bites, her gaze lingered on me. "You ever think about that night?" she asked almost too softly to hear. I froze. We both knew what she meant. My throat tightened, the memory coming back all at once. The rain in the woods, the flicker of a campfire, the way her breath had hitched when I'd touched her cheek. "Yeah," I said finally, the word heavy in my mouth, more than I probably should. A silence settled over us, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with the weight of what neither of us had dared to say for years. The air between us felt fragile, like one wrong word could make it shatter. Claire's fingers traced the rim of her coffee mug, her eyes never leaving the swirl of dark liquid inside. I could tell she was remembering it too, the way the forest had seemed to close in around us that night, the smell of wet earth, the pounding of our hearts that had nothing to do with fear of being lost. "You know," she began, voice low, "I used to tell myself it didn't mean anything, that we were just kids and it was just a moment." Her lips pressed together and she shook her head slightly. But I never believed that. Not really. I felt something shift in my chest, a deep ache I hadn't let myself feel in years. I wanted to reach across the table to take her hand, but instead I leaned back, afraid that if I touched her, all the years of distance would collapse in an instant. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose pane in the kitchen window. She glanced toward it, almost as if it had given her an excuse to look away from me. "I didn't come here just to bring breakfast," she said finally. I waited, my pulse in my ears. "My car's making that sound again, the one from last night." She gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thought maybe you could take a look." We both knew it wasn't just about the car. It was about finding a reason to be here, to stand in the same room, to stir up what had been buried too deep for too long. I nodded slowly. "Bring it by the shop after lunch," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. She gathered her things, but before she stepped out the door, she paused. "Micah?" "Yeah?" Her eyes softened in a way that nearly undid me. It never stopped meaning something to me. Then she was gone, the door closing quietly behind her, leaving me alone with the echo of her words and the sudden dangerous thought that maybe neither of us had really moved on. The shop was quiet that afternoon, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper, the click of my wrench against metal, the soft hum of the old heater in the corner. I heard her before I saw her, the slow crunch of tires on gravel, the faint squeak of brakes. Claire stepped out of her car, tucking her hair behind one ear as the wind tugged at it. She wore a dark sweater and jeans, simple, but there was something about the way she moved, unhurried, almost hesitant, that made the air feel heavier. "Engine's been acting up," she said, leaning against the car like she'd been here 1,000 times. "That same rattle. It's worse now." I popped the hood, pretending to focus on the mechanics, though every sense was tuned to her. The scent of her shampoo drifted over, faintly floral, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. She stepped closer, peering over my shoulder. "You always looked like you belonged here," she murmured, her voice just above the hum of the heater. "Even back then, fixing up that old dirt bike after school." I smiled without looking at her. "And you always looked like you belonged somewhere else. Somewhere bigger." There was a pause. Maybe I thought that too, but bigger doesn't always mean better. Her reflection shimmered in the chrome of the engine. I could feel the heat of her presence behind me, the almost imperceptible brush of her sleeve against my arm. My pulse jumped. I straightened, turning to face her. "The noise, it's coming from the belt tensioner. I'll need to take it out, check the bearings. Could be a couple hours." She met my eyes, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "I can wait," she said softly. The words carried weight far beyond their surface. She didn't mean just for the car. She meant for this, whatever this was. The years apart, the unanswered questions, the night in the woods that still lived between us. I swallowed, nodding once, All right then, make yourself comfortable. But comfort was the last thing either of us was going to feel that afternoon. Claire wandered the shop while I worked, her fingers brushing over old tools and faded photographs pinned to the wall. She stopped in front of one, me at 16, grinning awkwardly beside the dirt bike I'd spent all summer fixing. You still keep this up? She asked, tapping the photo lightly. Guess I never had a reason to take it down, I replied, tightening the last bolt before wiping my hands on a rag. She smiled, but it wasn't the light, easy smile I remembered. It was smaller, weighted. You know, I can still smell the pine from that night, the firewood, the damp earth. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all. I froze. My grip on the rag tightened. You didn't imagine it. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, testing. Then why did it feel like it never happened after? You never called. You never. She stopped herself, shaking her head as if she'd already said too much. I hesitated, my voice low. I thought you wanted to forget. I wanted to remember, she said, barely above a whisper. But remembering alone, it's a kind of punishment. The heater groaned in the corner, filling the silence between us. My heart thudded in my ears. I stepped closer, not enough to touch, but close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her. You were gone the next week, off to the city. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. And now, she asked. And now you're here, standing in my shop, saying things that make it harder to pretend that night didn't change everything. She exhaled slowly, her breath trembling. Maybe it's not too late. Her words hit me like a quiet storm. No lightning, no thunder, just the deep, certain shift of something that would not go back to the way it was. I didn't answer. Not yet. Some things needed to sit in the air for a while before they could be spoken. The rain came in sudden, heavy sheets, drumming against the tin roof of the shop until it drowned out every other sound. The wind howled through the gaps in the siding, carrying with it the cold bite of late autumn. Claire glanced toward the wide bay door where the world beyond had turned to a blur of gray and silver. Guess I'm stuck here for a while, she said, her voice soft but edged with something, relief maybe. I nodded, leaning against the workbench. Looks that way. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly. Do you still keep a heater in the back room? Yeah, it's not much, but it's warm. I gestured toward the small break room in the corner. She followed me inside, her boots squeaking faintly against the concrete. The room smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil. The old space heater glowed orange, casting a dim light over the two mismatched chairs and a low table cluttered with mugs. I poured her a cup of coffee from the dented thermos I kept there, sliding it toward her. She took it, wrapping her hands around it like it was something precious. You know, she said after a long sip, I used to dream about running into you, but in my dreams I never knew what to say. I looked at her, really looked at her. The years had changed her in subtle ways, her face sharper, her voice slower, like she'd learned to weigh her words before letting them go. But the way she was looking at me now, that was the same. What would you say? I asked quietly. That I missed you, she said, her eyes not leaving mine. That I never stopped thinking about that night, about how, for the first time, I didn't feel like the rich girl from the city or the outsider. I just felt yours. The heater hummed steadily, its warmth creeping into my bones. My pulse was a steady drumbeat, matching the rain outside. I've thought about it too, I admitted. More than I should. Her lips parted slightly, a flicker of something, hope, fear, crossing her face. And now, what do we do with all of that? I didn't have an answer, not yet, but I knew the distance between us felt smaller than it had in years, and the storm outside wasn't going to let her leave anytime soon. The hours seemed to stretch, the storm outside showing no sign of letting up. The rain tapped steadily against the small window, a rhythm that felt almost hypnotic. Claire had taken off her coat, draping it over the back of the chair. She sat closer to the heater now, her knees tucked slightly toward me, the steam from her coffee curling upward between us. "You remember the fire that night?" she asked suddenly, her voice quiet but carrying something that pulled me right back. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, you couldn't get warm, so I gave you my jacket." She smiled faintly, the memory softening her eyes. "And you burned your hands trying to keep the fire going. I noticed, you know. I noticed everything. The air between us felt heavy, charged. I could almost hear the forest around us from all those years ago, the distant rush of the creek, the crackle of dry pine in the fire. Sometimes," she said, "I think that night ruined me for anyone else." Her gaze held mine, steady, unflinching. Because it wasn't just about what happened. It was about feeling like someone saw me, really saw me. I swallowed, the weight of her words pressing into me. "I saw you then. I see you now." For a moment, we didn't move. The storm roared outside, but in that small, dimly lit room, the space between us felt as fragile as it was inevitable. Her hand shifted slightly on the table, fingers brushing against mine. Just a whisper of contact, but enough to send a spark racing through me. Neither of us pulled away. Her fingers lingered against mine, hesitant at first, then curling ever so slightly, like she was testing whether the years between us could really just vanish. I didn't speak, neither did she. The heater hummed in the corner, casting a soft warmth across her face. She shifted in her seat, leaning in just enough for me to catch the faintest trace of her perfume, something subtle and earthy like cedar after rain. It was the same scent from that night in the woods, faint but unmistakable. "Micah," she whispered, almost like my name might break if she said it too loud. Her eyes were searching mine, and I could see the storm's reflection in them, wild, restless, but also full of something dangerously close to longing. "I don't know if I'm making a mistake," she breathed, "but I can't pretend I don't still feel it." I let my hand turn under hers, our palms meeting, fitting together like they had all those years ago. "Maybe," I said quietly, "the mistake would be pretending we don't." She drew a deep, shaky breath, and I could see her fighting some invisible battle with herself. Then, slowly, she stood, still holding my hand, and took a single step closer. It was such a small movement, but it felt like crossing a line we could never uncross. The storm outside raged on, but in that moment, all I could hear was the quiet thud of my own heartbeat. When she finally let go, it wasn't to step away, it was to reach up, her fingers brushing my cheek with a gentleness that almost undid me. And in her eyes, I saw the question neither of us dared to put into words. Savannah didn't pull her hand back this time. Her fingertips lingered at my jawline, tracing the faint stubble there, like she was trying to memorize the shape of me all over again. "I used to dream about this," she murmured, her voice low enough that it felt like a secret we weren't supposed to share. Her eyes searched mine, hesitant, hopeful, and afraid, all tangled together. I swallowed, because I knew exactly what she meant. Those years hadn't dulled the memory of that night in the forest. If anything, time had made it sharper, cutting deeper when I least expected it. "You think I didn't?" I asked softly. Something in her expression shifted, just barely, but it was enough. A quiet breaking. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years, and then she stepped in, closing the last of the space between us. The air felt heavy, dense with everything we'd never said. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the rapid beat of her heart when she pressed her palm flat against my chest. For a moment, we just stood there, close enough to touch but not crossing that final threshold. The storm outside battered against the garage walls as if trying to remind us the world still existed. Her voice came again, barely a whisper. "That night, I thought it was just a moment, but it never left me." "It wasn't just a moment," I told her, my voice low, steady. It was the start of something we didn't know how to finish, and maybe we still didn't. But as she leaned in, her forehead resting lightly against mine, I realized finishing it wasn't the point. The point was that we were here now, breathing the same air, sharing the same storm. Her breath trembled against my skin. I could feel the conflict in her, how badly she wanted to move forward and how much the past still held her back. Outside, the rain slammed harder, the sound wrapping around us like a drumbeat, sealing us in this moment. "Micah," she began, my name catching slightly on her tongue. I closed my eyes because the way she said it wasn't the voice of the girl I remembered. It was the voice of a woman who'd carried her own storms and still found her way back here. "You don't have to say anything," I murmured. "Not if you're not ready." Her fingers curled lightly into the front of my shirt, pulling me closer. "I am ready," she said, her voice steadier this time. "I've been ready since the day I drove away from this town." I didn't think. I just let my hand slide up the curve of her back, feeling the warmth of her through the damp fabric of her blouse. She shivered but didn't move away. "You left," I said quietly, "and I stayed. But it didn't matter, did it? Because I carried you with me every damn day." Her laugh was soft, almost sad. "Then we were both fools, because I carried you too." The air between us collapsed. Her lips found mine, not rushed, not frantic, but slow, deep, and certain. It was the kind of kiss that didn't ask for permission, because the answer had always been yes. I felt the years melt, replaced by that night in the forest, the flicker of firelight, the sound of her breath in the dark. But this time, we weren't lost. We knew exactly where we were, and exactly who we were holding. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were luminous, her cheeks flushed. "This isn't just another moment," she whispered. "This is where it begins again." And I believed her. The hours that followed blurred into something unmeasured. Time didn't tick the way it usually did. It stretched and folded around us, like the rain outside had washed the world away and left only this small, dimly lit cocoon. Savannah sat across from me on the old couch, her knees drawn up, one of my flannel shirts draped loosely over her. She'd found it in the back of the closet, probably from a decade ago, but it still fit her like it had been made for her. Her hair, still damp from earlier, curled against her shoulders. The scent of rain and faint wood smoke clung to her, the same way it had that night in the forest years ago. I kept finding myself staring at her hands. Back then, those hands had been small, hesitant. Now, they were steady. They looked like the hands of someone who had made choices, built things, maybe even destroyed a few along the way. "What?" she asked, noticing my gaze. There was a trace of a smile playing on her lips. "I'm trying to figure out if you're real," I said. Her smile deepened, but her eyes softened. "And?" I'm leaning toward yes, but part of me still thinks I'm dreaming. She reached across the space between us, fingers brushing mine. "You're not dreaming, Micah. If you were, I wouldn't be this nervous." Her voice cracked just a little on that last word, and it undid me. I moved closer, closing the gap, my knees brushing hers. The quiet between us wasn't empty. It was full of all the things we hadn't said for years. I wanted to tell her about the nights I'd driven down empty roads, imagining her in the passenger seat. I wanted to tell her about the way I'd see her in strangers' faces, only to feel that familiar hollow when it wasn't her. Instead, I just said, "You've always been here, Savannah, even when you weren't." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "And you've always been mine, even when you couldn't be." The weight of those words pressed against us. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a truth carved out of years and distance and mistakes. When she leaned in again, it was slower than before, but deeper. The kiss tasted like rain, like time, like the ache of something found after being lost for too long. And I knew, whatever came next, neither of us was walking away untouched. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, but neither of us noticed. The cabin felt like it was holding its breath, walls steeped in the scent of pine and faint smoke. windows fogged over so the world outside couldn't see in. Savannah and I had drifted from the couch to the small kitchen table, coffee mugs untouched between us. My hands rested on the rough grain of the wood, hers tracing the rim of her cup like she was circling something she wasn't ready to name. "Micah," she began, then stopped. Her throat worked like the words were heavier than she expected. "I don't want this to be just a night," she said finally. The air between us sharpened. She wasn't talking about physical closeness. She was talking about the years between then and now, about not slipping back into silence once the moment passed. "You think I do?" I said quietly. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Back then, I thought you were the one who could keep me grounded, but you never came after me when I left." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. "I wanted to," I said. "I almost did, but you had this whole future ahead of you. City lights, bigger things. I was a mechanic who barely had gas money to get out of town. I didn't think I had the right to ask you to stay." Savannah's eyes searched mine, steady and unblinking. "You never needed to ask," she said. "I would have stayed." The truth hit me like a slow, heavy wave. All those years, both of us waiting for a sign that never came. I reached for her hand, and she let me take it. Her fingers curled into mine, warm and certain. "What if it's too late?" I asked, almost afraid of the answer. She shook her head. "It's only too late if we decide it is." We sat there, the clock ticking softly in the background, both of us knowing this was the pivot, the choice between walking back into separate lives or stepping into something uncharted, no matter how messy it might be. "I'm not letting you disappear again," I said finally, my voice low but certain. Her lips curved into something between relief and disbelief. "Then don't." The decision was made, not in some grand gesture, but in the quiet grip of her hand in mine, the unspoken vow that whatever storms came, we'd face them here, together. Somewhere outside, the first hint of dawn brushed the sky. Inside, it felt like a beginning we'd been chasing for years. By morning, the rain had fully cleared, leaving the air crisp enough to see our breath. The world outside was washed clean, puddles catching fragments of sunlight, the mountains wearing a pale gold crown. Savannah stood by the open door, her sweater pulled tight around her. She looked like she belonged here now, not as a guest passing through, but as someone who had found her way back. I leaned on the door frame, watching her take it all in. The silence between us wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It was easy, like we'd learned to breathe in the same rhythm again. "Your car's fixed," I said quietly. She smiled without looking back. "That's not why I'm staying." I didn't press for more. Sometimes the truest things didn't need explaining. We shared coffee on the porch, mugs warming our hands while the wind carried the scent of wet pine and fresh earth. Every so often our knees brushed, small reminders that we were here, together, not drifting apart this time. At one point, she turned to me, her expression soft but steady. "You know, we don't have to figure it all out today," she said. "We can just be." It was such a simple thing, but it loosened something deep inside me. For years, I'd thought love had to be all or nothing, grand declarations or inevitable endings, but maybe it could be this: quiet mornings, shared coffee, the certainty that someone had chosen to stay. A hawk circled high above the ridge. Down the road, the town was waking up, an old pickup passing, the faint sound of a dog barking, life moving forward, whether we were ready or not. Savannah reached for my hand, and I gave it without hesitation. We didn't need promises carved in stone. The only thing that mattered was that for the first time in years, we were both standing in the same place, looking in the same direction. The day stretched out ahead of us, wide and unwritten, and for once, that didn't scare me at all.